conversation as well. Thank you. And then I'm going to open up for some conversations as well. Although, I mean, I did want you two to have a conversation with both of you as well. I think you've really given us a lot to think about. You really I love the perspectives from both of you. But when we're talking about in the relationship of what our young people are being shown, being taught, and especially in the climate that we're living in right now, how do we, or do we need to change the way we are directing the messages that we give out at the moment? Let me just start with that.
Yeah, look, I think it's a great question. I think visual literacy is fundamentally important to teach to all children. I've done it with my own kids. I have two kids with my wife, my partner here in Britain. My wife is from Portmore in Jamaica. But I have two adopted kids that I adopted. I'm in Ghana as well. And with all of them, I've taught visual literacy, being able to critique images all the time and to think about how those images then impact on your own sense of identity, self-worth, and the way in which you move within the world. And I've even done work, with my son in particular, in terms of making him aware of how we internalize these images and how they get played out. Just a story with my son. I took my son when he was about 14 to the Natural History Museum, did the museum tour in London. They had this Africa exhibits thing going on about 2014, whatever. I said, son, this year how they've messed everything up with Africa. How they changed everything. Yeah, Dad, yeah. So this year how they distort everything. So we went into one of the rooms, and there were these maps, and they all distorted. Yeah, Dad, yeah. I see how they distorted. Yeah. We went into this other room where they had these artifacts, and they said, you see how they've arranged them, so they've corrupted it. He says, yeah, Dad, yeah. It's an exaggeration. Yeah. Because my son always agrees because he wants to get to the food part. He says, yeah. We're gonna. Yeah. And then we went into this other room where they had this warrior statue, and the man had a phallus that was about 3 meters. And my son said, is that another exaggeration? I said, And I said, son, we internalize some of this stuff. We got to. So what I'm saying is that my daughter says that's a heteronormative joke. So I do apologise. I should have given you a warning for that one. Sorry, but for me, it's the literacy that matters. Really, in terms of literacy, I'm a bit more hopeful in terms of the actions, because I think social media is so powerful in terms of providing platforms for people. So if you're on the social media platform regime and black Twitter, black Facebook, black everywhere, then you'll see that people are creating their own content all the time and telling alternative stories all the time. AI has made it incredibly easy to do as well, in terms of once you've got the knowledge and the data, then crafting stories and narratives to tell people. So I think it's more a case of empowering people to do the work. That's fundamentally important for me. So I'm more hopeful. And in terms of, I always start with, look, I was raised in the church context. So we start with money isn't the issue. Money is never the issue. The issue is, can we get the people together with the resource of people to get things done? So I've always worked on that basis. If you start with waiting for the money, you won't get anything done, especially in terms of academia. You spend 6 months writing up a proposal and then they'll tell you it's really good, but wait for the other one. So my approach has always been to beg and to learn to beg well. So wherever I go, I beg. So my last film production was an independent film. I went to a charitable event with a anti-racist charity, and I said, give me 50 grand. I said, give me 50 grand, we can make a 150 grand film for you. I said, we'll put that. And I said, all right, then we'll do it. I begged every academic that I knew. I went, Willie Jennings at Yale, I said, Willie, please, you owe me a favour, did me a favour. I said, Muriel, everybody I could find, I said, I beg you. And then the business model that we used was, we made it on 50 grand, we produced it for the American university and college market, and we sell it at 10 grand a pop for the lifetime license. So the charity got, there's a charitable deal, we didn't make any money off it, you know what I mean? But the charity got the money back. And it was a business model that we've then used now with some other charities that we're working with in terms of developing film projects. So we've got an alternative. The film is called After the Flood, The Church's Slavery and Reconciliation. We look at the theological ideas that informed transatlantic chattel slavery, plantation slavery in Barbados in the 17th century in particular, where you get the first black codes, and the church unfolds theology into those codes. We used, so it was an alternative story, and we managed to do that without a great deal of resource or money. So I would just say, learn to beg. It's what is it? TLC, ain't too proud to beg.
What could you answer that?
I can't beg, man. I can't remember what the question was. I was so swept up in that story.
I'm not sure I can either, to be honest. It was more about, like, do we need to change the way we're doing things to be able to move forward and to kind of generate a different story for the younger people moving up and going into academia, going into the museums, going into these archives. What do we need to do to change how things are? As you know, we've all, like, specifically in Robert's presentation, where he was saying we have to change. You know, we have to do the work. So what?
But who is we?
We as people of colour.
Okay, like old, like parents. You mean like older?
I suppose the people that are already working in these areas.
Mm-hmm. Like I don't know what we like. Change has to happen, but I don't know like what we specifically have to do to change. I feel like there maybe just needs to be more of us. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? And the mechanisms for doing that are. Yeah, I don't know, because it's like, and again, especially in this particular political landscape and climate, I feel like quite worried about the immediate future, you know, and I feel like the threats might become kind of more challenging than many of us have experienced in recent decades, you know?
It's interesting. Sorry, not to kind of come into, but that question in itself has kind of come out of what I've been hearing through the night. But I know, you know, if you'd asked me that question a few years ago, especially when Black Lives Matter was happening and all that was going on, I remember somebody asking me something. You know, there was a lot of, you know, what do you need? What do you want to do? And I kind of said, well, that's really victim blaming, you know, because you're asking me to solve your problem. You've worked out there's a problem. We have a problem with racism. We have a problem with this, and then you're coming to me to try and work that out for you. Mm-hmm. And I suppose I still agree with that from the looking at it as from the other side, somebody coming and asking me, but then we're now changing that story and taking our own power within that story, within that narrative, and really saying, okay, these are, you know, if we really want this to change, we need to do it ourselves because nobody's going to do it for us. Mm. So it's I suppose I'm still asking why. I'm expecting you guys to give me answers.
Look, if I can quote my fellow Brumby, Kehinde Andrews, you know, Kehinde always thinks Malcolm X has all the answers to everything. It's a panacea for every problem that black people have faced throughout history. But there is some truth within it, because I think if we're looking at in terms of history and the history of black nationalism, then the first step in terms of revolutionary transformation is always conscientizing the people. You know, you've got to educate the people. So our first task has to be in terms of education. What's being taught in the classroom? What's being taught outside the classroom? And how do we ensure that that content is equitable, is just, is inclusive, provides alternative ways of knowing? That has to be the first process. So for me personally, that's why I teach in a variety of locations. So I teach at the seminary. We have the largest cohort of black postgraduates anywhere in Western Europe. I still have a prison class. I've seen some of you, I won't see some of you there. I still have a prison class. I still have a prison class where I work with working class men racialized as black, racialized as white. So the community-based education, run free courses. In fact, this is how the education matters. For 5 years, I ran a free course for anybody who wanted to do a course in theology. It's a hard sell, you know, theology. Anybody who wanted to do a course in theology in the black community, you could come on a Wednesday night to the church that I was going to in the middle of the Handsworth, free class, great resources, everything there. We had one guy come in one night, stayed with us for 3 months of the course, and then he said, actually, I'm already a graduate. I've got a graduate degree in history, but this has inspired me to move from history to theology. When he did his master's degree at Birmingham, did his PhD at Birmingham, cut a long story short, that's Professor Anthony Reddy, who became the first black professor of theology in 900 years of Oxford University. Started on an access course that I ran on a cold winter night in Handsworth. It's conscientizing the people. So maybe we have to start thinking about how we move in this. What kind of sacrifices are we willing to make? What are we willing to do for the next generation to begin with conscientizing the people? So for me, that's the first starting point. Kindy would then say, the next thing is you develop a critical mass. Once you've got a critical mass of conscious people, everything becomes possible. And I'll end with this, because we talk for a living. You go on, don't you? You know what I mean? This day and age of commodifying education, you have to give students value for money, don't you? You keep talking to the last minute. Get your £93 worth this hour, But the point is, if we look at conscientizing the people, critical mass. One of the earliest films that I made, I sold the idea to BBC 4 back in the day. It was produced by David Olashoga when he was starting his career. It's called Ebony Towers. We started with 1967. Critical mass of black students. UCLA Berkeley said, we've had enough. We can't take no more of that. We want black studies. We want more black lecturers. And we're gonna basically stay in this building until you give it us. They did a homecoming and they won. They won the university back then. Critical mass, critical mass of people, and then deciding that you're going to work together to transform whichever institution you're in. So for me, these are not difficult concepts or ideas that we have to reinvent. They're integral to our history of struggle, So I always say to my son, there are 7 books every black boy needs to read because they tell us everything about negotiating the world. He's read 3 of them. He hasn't read the other ones yet. So he isn't fully grown as far as I'm concerned. But what I'm trying to say is, in our literary history, people better, wiser, stronger, more diligent than us have worked out how to transform the systems and structures that we face. So I think it is possible, and there is a process to doing this. So you need to work out where you are in the process. The other thing I would say is this, it's a theological thing, is underpinning all of this has to be moral courage. And that's part of the problem. Most people aren't willing to do the right thing at the right time and stick their head above the parapet. We're talking about threats. Listen, I can't think of a time when my life wasn't in threat, or I wasn't threatened. First day I went to school, a boy tried to box me down. I was 5. I said, what's going on? You know what I mean? Next day they're calling me black, this, black. I said, my goodness, this is school, this is like a war zone. When I was at secondary school, you had to fight to get in the school, fight to get out. I said to my dad, but I said, listen, that's why you all did karate back in the day and kung fu. So I said, we're black kung fu champions. When I got married, I said to my wife, listen, you got any martial arts? She said, my wife said, I was in the Jamaican army. I said, I love you. So I always say to people, my wife was in the Jamaican army, is proficient in small arms. A hobby is going to the rifle range. And I needed somebody who was gonna be alongside me. And if I'm gonna have moral courage, I need somebody. Jamaicans call it backative. You know what I'm saying? So, but to get to the serious point of it, we have to have that moral courage. We have to be willing to take the hits for the sake of moving things forward. If you're silent, there's always a danger of complicity. That's it. Or help him, Jesus!
I would like to add something to that. I would echo what you're saying about the kind of blueprint is already there. I'm like a huge fan of the Black Panthers, and I feel so much that they had to offer in terms of organisation is just like incredibly rich and incredibly powerful. But I think this idea of critical mass is absolutely key. But what does critical mass look like in Britain? There's not actually the numbers of black people to have critical mass. The critical mass in this country has to look like coalition. And how does coalition occur in this current moment? So I do think we are in a different time. I had a hell of a time growing up. The world that my children was born into is not the same one that I was experiencing at all. but now it feels like it is actually,
Yeah.
that might be coming to pass, you know?
Yeah.
Again, in a cyclical way that I don't even know if it's cyclical, but like, I don't know, potential, who knows? But yeah, I think this idea of critical mass is something we have to really think about, but what that looks like in Britain today and how we can kind of go about actually making that happen beyond rousing rhetoric, you know?
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I think it's scary times right now, and I think that's a whole another conversation at the moment. But I'm going to open it up to the
Sure.
to the audience. I think. Oh no, that's one. Sorry, go for it. So who would like to ask a question now?
So there is the statement, they say when people know better, when you know better, you do better. And I think there is something to be said that a lot of us know. And I'm saying us, I'm going to generalize. If you don't think you're part of it, exclude yourself. A lot of us know. But I think the process of knowing better is an embodied thing. So when we're talking about freeing ourselves, it's a messy process. It's an undoing process. So we know what needs to change, but in order to be about the change, we have to change. So what would you say, how do we, especially trying to fight the power, we have to come to terms with our own power before we can even start to think about the moral courage. So can you talk about the embodied process that we can go through so that it's not just the heady stuff, it's a whole body approach to bringing about change? And I think that's also linked to a spiritual understanding of who we are.
Do you want to go?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question. I think about this in terms of exorcism. So my book on film studies is called Documentary as Exorcism. Reason why I use the word exorcism is because I argue that enslavement and colonialism was spiritual practice. It was what Jamaicans would call obia. It was a bewitchment of black people racialized as black, bewitchment. So therefore, for me, decolonization can also be described as a kind of exorcising praxis, where, you know, what Bell Hooks has an essay called Exorcising Evil, that's womanist theologian Emily Towles, exorcising evil. So for me, it's getting the oppressor out. That's the process, and that can be mind, body, religion. Also, it's intersectional, race, class, gender, human sexuality, getting the oppressor out of one system. Charles Long, great dean of African American religious studies, reminds us of that fact that black religion has been an exorcising force throughout history. So that's the way in which I attempt to conceptualize it, but then also practice, and thinking about it as a form of exercising liberation.
But in the process of getting the oppressor out, which was once part of my identity, then who the flip am I? Now I've released the oppressor. Who am I? And I think that's a painful thing. Amanda talks about sometimes trying to feed those who are hungry and don't even know they're hungry. Because they're afraid to go through that process.
Yeah, I think it's complex for each person. It works out in different ways. But I can only tell you in terms of my experience. Look, I'm old. So it started with Roots in 1976, Alex Haley. So who are we? My goodness, Kunta Kinte, Toby. Well, with many of us then began Kwame Kwei-Armah's work on this. That's what Faisal Abdul-Allah. We all began then asking that question, who we are, and beginning that search. I made a program about this last year in terms of names, and it was a similar kind of thing. What do our names mean? Beckford is a brand. What do we then do with it? Who am I then if I take this name away? How do I, what kind of psychosocial impact does it have on me in terms of how I move in the world? It's complicated. I went back to the Caribbean. So for me, going to my ancestral land where my grandmother, great-grandmother is buried was foundational to finding myself as a Jamaican. My passport, I have a British passport, which is, you use that to get through security quickly when you can do. But when I'm in trouble in the world anywhere, I take out the Jamaican one. But people don't want to kill Jamaicans. You know what I mean? Where are you from? Jamaica. Irish Bob Marley, you know what I mean? It's different. You're from Britain, I'm going to shoot you. So for me, that was the first step. I then did the usual DNA testing, all the other things to find my kinfolk in West Africa. But I then felt most comfortable in this diasporic space. Paul Gilroy calls it Black Atlantic, although I think it's much more connected to Africa than Gilroy gave it credit. Other people have moved that space back. So we live in a space of double consciousness. And for Du Bois, that double consciousness was a gift, the gift of second sight. We live in between. We create music, language, culture with these entwining or creolizing of cultures and ideas. So I live in that diasporic space, and I'm very happy in it. But I'm equally happy when I go to Ghana. I'm a chief in Ghana. If you go up to Tamale, just say Robert Beckford, and they will, you get a discount. You know what I mean? I mean, in Jamaica, my family's in Portland and Westmoreland. I feel at home in that space because that's where my kin from. I'm a Coventry City fan. Yeah, we're doing all right now. I mean, I don't know about. We gave you another thrashing. But the point is, part of me is rooted here in terms of having been brought up in Coventry as well. So that kind of diasporic space, I feel very comfortable with, but recognizing I have multiple points of origin and therefore multiple identities in many respects, and that's a gift. I don't see that as a problem.
Have we got another question? Or did you want to?
I would just like to add something
No,
very quick to that. I think so many of us grow up or socialized in a way where we are completely disconnected from ourselves. We're also like disconnected from, so I believe like in the interconnectivity of all being. A principle that you see in many African cosmologies, it's also foundational to Buddhism. It's just a kind of, it is actually a foundational principle in most traditions outside of kind of European Enlightenment traditions. And I think when I kind of intellectually learned about this interconnectivity, how I am connected with my ancestors, how everything is connected with the land, entangled with the natural world, connected with one's ancestors, present and connected in oneself. I understood it maybe intellectually, but not experientially. And for me, the kind of experiential feeling, embodied feeling of it, I think I have come to most deeply through like meditation and trying to practice Buddhism. But I honestly think it's really key that we all have a deeper understanding of how everything is interconnected, and that will arm us in many ways to contest so many of these forces that colonize our mind and prey on us because we have often low self-worth